Good evening, this is News.PH, but it's not politics as usual. I'm Pia Ontiveros. In a sudden turn of events, U.S. Marine Private First Class Joseph Scott Pemberton was transferred from the USS Peleliu to Camp Aguinaldo. Pemberton is the suspect in the killing of Filipino transgender woman Jennifer Laude. Joining us tonight in this first part of the show, DOJ Undersecretary or Justice Undersecretary Jose Justiniano, who was counsel for one of 4 American soldiers, correct?
Actually,
apart from Daniel Smith.
No. Let me correct that.
Oh, okay.
There were 6 suspects when the case was investigated. I represented initially 2 of them, Corporal
Yes.
Cory Buris and Albert Lara.
Okay.
I was able to get a dismissal for the 2 of them during the preliminary investigation, as I was able to prove that they were not inside the van where the incident allegedly happened. So 4 were left.
Okay.
Silkwood, Smith,
Duplantis.
Carpentier, and Duplantis for trial. And my services were retained by Silkwood.
Okay.
And then, as we all know, 3 were acquitted, including my client.
On the grounds of?
There was no evidence against them, the 3.
Yeah, when you say no evidence against them,
No
meaning they did
evidence
not
that they participated in the alleged rape.
even if they were in the van
If
at the
they-
time.
Because mere presence will not make you liable. So Smith was convicted, and in his appeal, he retained my services. I represented only Daniel Smith during the appeal, which he interposed.
Okay. Before we go on to the case of Jennifer Laude, how does the U.S. government, is it the U.S. Embassy that gets your services, the services of private lawyers who will
No,
handle
it's-
the cases for these
No, it's like
American
this.
soldiers?
The U.S. Embassy has a list of accredited lawyers, law firms.
Okay.
And in cases like this, the list is shown to the potential client. And they choose the counsel which they want from the list.
So at that time, you were with what
I
law
was
firm?
with Sisip Salatar Hernandez and Gatmaitan Law Offices. I was then a partner in that law firm. That was in 2005.
Yes. How many other law firms are on that list?
Of course, the law firm of King Rodrigo, the husband of Butch Anson Roa.
Okay.
And then John Colosso, who represented Duplantis. And then Attorney Benjamin Formoso, who represented Daniel Smith.
And the other big law firms, ACRA, for example, the firm,
There were no
etc.
big law because, you know, that was a very controversial case. And I even in my own law firm,
No, I mean, there were no other big law firms in the list.
there were.
There were, yeah.
But since it was a controversial case, even my own law firm initially was hesitant to accept engagement.
Okay.
And no partners there would like to handle that case.
Okay. So who else, you mentioned 3 other names of law firms that were on that list.
Yes, as I have said, King Rodrigo,
Yes. Apart from them.
John Colosso, I cannot recall now the
Okay.
name.
How many law firms are on that list? And is this something that is...
4. 4 law
4
firms,
lang.
yes.
Okay. Is this... so it's like a running list. It's shown to every American who will need a lawyer in the
Yes.
Philippines, ganon?
Yes. There are
Okay.
many cases like that one. In fact, I represented also a retired U.S. serviceman, and he got my name from that list also.
What case was this? What case was that?
What?
Of the retired U.S. serviceman?
It's also a case of multiple rape.
Oh, and what happened to that case?
I was able to get an acquittal.
Okay. So sayang, no? Dapat pala kayo ang kinuha.
It's
Kaya lang
really
Justice
now a reversal
Undersecretary na
of
kayo.
role.
Okay. But in this case, they got, Pemberton got the services of the Accra law firm.
It's not really clear because from what I read in the media, Attorney Flores,
Garcia Flores.
Flores is handling the case in her personal capacity.
Ah, okay, you can do that.
That is what I read in the media. Maybe they allow, in Accra, they allow their partners to handle private cases.
Yeah. Earlier you said that law firms, the partners usually shy away from controversial cases. But there are many law firms that take on controversial cases, hindi ba?
There are, mostly corporate law firms. They prepare to handle cases of big multinational companies because that's where the money is.
Okay. Let's go now to the Joseph Scott Pemberton case now. Let's talk about what happened this morning, that sudden turn of events. You had Pemberton transferred from the PLLU to Camp Aguinaldo. Was the Justice Department included in the negotiations or the arrangements for this transfer?
No.
Shouldn't you have been?
I'm not sure if we were consulted because at this stage, we're only concerned with the custody. That's not part of our job. The interpretation of the BFA is a matter between the Department of Foreign Affairs, the BFA Commission, and the U.S. Embassy. As the one conducting the preliminary investigation, our job at this point is merely to evaluate the evidence presented by the police investigator. And should Pemberton decide to submit a counter affidavit or a statement of his witnesses, then we evaluate the evidence of both sides. And if there is a finding of probable cause, then we will file the corresponding information. Otherwise, if we are not convinced that there is no probable cause to indict Pemberton, then we will dismiss the case.
We meaning
the
DOJ operating through or acting through
the City Prosecutor of Olongapo.
Okay. His transfer to Aguinaldo does not mean that he is in Philippine jurisdiction and in Philippine custody, correct?
That's a matter which can be best answered by the Department of Foreign Affairs.
But no, I mean, given the facts, he is in an American installation within Camp Aguinaldo. So does that mean that he is not in Philippine custody?
Physically, because the place of detention is a military camp. But I am not aware of the arrangement. As I heard it this morning, it's a joint custody between the armed forces of the Philippines and the U.S. government, U.S. military.
Okay. Can you venture in, to answer this question? Because there are people who say that this kind of an arrangement denigrates Philippine sovereignty. Does it?
I'm sorry, I am not in a position to answer that. That can be best answered by our politicians because that's a political matter.
Okay. Can you define jurisdiction and define custody?
Jurisdiction is defined by law. It is the power of the court to try cases. Custody is the physical restraint imposed on a person who is the subject of a warrant of arrest.
Okay. Is it correct to say that both the Philippines and the U.S. can have or have criminal jurisdiction over Pemberton?
No.
Only one or the other? But
only one.
But what if the U.S. will also try him? For example, he may be liable under U.S. military law.
That's a different matter. But the primary jurisdiction lies with us insofar as the violation of our laws are concerned.
Okay. Does the DOJ know if Pemberton is already, has already been subjected to U.S. military law proceedings? Has he been charged? Is that something
we are not aware.
You're not aware, and it doesn't matter to you.
It doesn't matter.
It won't matter to,
it won't matter.
To the case
it has no bearing on the case.
No bearing on the case. Okay. Yesterday, DFA spokesman Charles Jose said that they would ask for custody of Pemberton at the proper time, and a note from the DFA to the U.S. Embassy asked for custody of Pemberton when an arrest warrant is out. No? And then all of a sudden, you had this transfer this morning. What do you think happened?
Legally, a person can be arrested only if there is a warrant of arrest. And when you speak of arrest, that means detention, custody. That's the only exception wherein a person may be arrested even without a warrant of arrest is that if you're caught in the act.
Okay, meaning if
let's say
caught in the act
entrapment
of
operation,
killing Jennifer
right then and
Laude,
there, while committing a crime, he is caught by the police. He can be arrested. Or if a crime has in fact been committed and the arresting officer has reasonable ground to believe that the person to be arrested is the one who committed the crime, he can also be arrested even without a warrant. But that's the exception. We call it a case of warrantless arrest.
Okay. Yusek Justiniano, does Pemberton's transfer to Camp Aguinaldo act like or have some sort of an exhaust valve effect? Kumbaga, does it serve the purpose of lessening or taking off the pressure?
I would say on the part of the government. Because, you heard people saying, why are we treating Pemberton with kid gloves? Why are we allowing him to be under the custody of the U.S. Government? But we have the Visiting Forces Agreement. And the constitutionality of that agreement has been sustained by the Supreme Court. So we have to respect that.
So until or unless it is amended,
yes,
or
we have
changed
to
in a manner that is the only way.
abrogated, then we have to respect the treaty.
Okay. What is going to happen if there is a finding of probable cause and the case is filed and an arrest warrant is issued and therefore Pemberton is going to be arrested? Where will he go? If the judge says that he's supposed to be detained in the Olongapo City Jail,
well,
anong gagawin ng DOJ?
You will apply now Section 6 of Article 5 of the BFA, which says that the U.S. may request the Philippine government to take custody of Pemberton. As to whether that request may be granted, it is, or on what ground the request may be granted or denied, it is not stated in the BFA.
Okay. So you can, the DOJ
no,
can,
it's not.
The judge,
the request should be made to the Department of Foreign Affairs.
Okay. And they will decide whether or not they will hand over Pemberton.
Yes.
But the curious case here is that he is in a in JUSMAG, which is an American installation within Camp Aguinaldo.
Yes.
So, of course, your imagination can run wild and say, okay, let's say the case is filed, the arrest warrants issued, Pemberton is supposed to be arrested. Are Philippine authorities going to go into that American installation and physically take custody of Joseph Scott Pemberton and pick him up and bring him out? Is that going to happen?
Let me answer that issue. Why is arrest necessary? During the arraignment, the presence of the accused is necessary. The information will be read, and he will be asked to plea, whether guilty or not guilty. Now, if you read the BFA, the U.S. is obliged to produce the body of the person under their custody whenever his presence is needed. And one instance when his presence is needed is during the arraignment. And in the case of that Subic rape case, they were brought by the U.S. Embassy or the U.S. military before the regional trial court of Makati during the arraignment.
Yeah. And they were present the whole time.
They were present. In fact,
even if they were detained at the U.S. Embassy.
Yes.
Yeah. So you are saying...
I don't recall any hearing which they
wala
missed.
sila.
Wala sila. In fact, personally, I advise my clients, Silkud, you don't have to be there. You have been arraigned already. Why expose yourself to risk? Said, no, sir, I want to observe the proceeding. I want to hear the witnesses testify.
Yeah. Okay.
Then he insisted. I respected his wish.
Oh. But my question, Yusek, is, yun na nga, no? Halimbawa na meron ng arrest warrant, ang Philippine authorities ba pupunta doon? Are you going, you meaning Philippine government authorities, are you going to Camp Aguinaldo, that American installation, and get Pemberton and put him in your custody? Is that going to happen? Or is the Philippine government going to be satisfied with, okay, you can keep him there, but as long as you bring him to arraignment and trial, we're fine?
That is really the call of the Department of Foreign Affairs. If you will recall, in the case of Daniel Smith, after he was convicted, he stayed for 2 weeks in the Makati City Jail. But because there was an agreement between Ambassador Kenny and Secretary Romulo, his custody was transferred to the U.S. Embassy, to the U.S. government, because of that agreement.
Okay.
Pursuant to the Visiting Forces Agreement.
But would the Philippine government agree to something like that, or keeping Pemberton in that American installation in Camp Aguinaldo?
As I have said, Pia, I'm very sorry. That is not within our field of competence in the Department of Justice.
Okay, we'll take a short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. So why would they even think of moving him to Camp Aguinaldo if he is not under Philippine jurisdiction anyway?
Well, basically, it's after 9/11, the war on terrorism introduced a new concept of American positioning here in the Philippines, one of which was because of the fact that we had scrapped the U.S. bases treaty, then they had to find ways of positioning American forces here to engage in the war on terrorism. And one such method was to embed U.S. installations within Philippine military installations. So we have that in Camp Aguinaldo. We also have that in southern Philippines, of which you would have that in the West Mincom.
But of course, we cannot just easily walk into JUSMAG in Aguinaldo or into that U.S. military installation.
I don't think so, because it has an American, most likely this has an American commander, and you will have to coordinate with them in order to just walk in there. So technically, it's like saying, okay, a camp within a camp. That's the way it's been going on since the war on terrorism.
What does this achieve, putting Pemberton in Camp Aguinaldo, although in JUSMAG?
Well, it gives a perception that he's in Philippine, quote-unquote, camp, in a Philippine camp. So sorts of makes him within reach of Philippine authorities, whereas before he was in USS Peleliu, which is an American ship, and you really can't, just board an American ship. But here, he gives the impression that he is apparently in a Philippine camp. Apparently, it's the point here, because like I said, there's a camp within a camp.
Okay.
So it just gives that, it seems to give that impression. It might head off criticism that he's not under Philippine control. It also gives this impression that the Americans are slowly cooperating, or apparently cooperating. But one thing that we have to be clear here is the Americans are very consistent in protecting their soldiers or their servicemen in times of such legal cases. And they've been doing it around the world, from Italy to Japan, elsewhere. They've always been like that. They've always had, whenever there's a criminal case or a legal case involving an American soldier, the Americans always try to control or try to gain jurisdiction over the person. Okay?
Okay, but this is an improvement over the Daniel Smith experience, right? Because Smith was in the U.S. Embassy. At least here, even if he is within a U.S. installation, within a Philippine camp, like you said, it still gives that impression that he is within reach. So it is an improvement. Not quite?
Well, that's still a camp within a camp, actually. Okay, so the thing is that can he still be reached if for example, the legal proceedings begin already? Okay, so how accessible will he be? Okay, or if he's convicted, what will be the situation? Will we have the Daniel Smith situation again, where he is in the U.S. Embassy, and then eventually something happens, and then, because like I said, the Americans are very consistent in controlling their, and in this case of the Visiting Forces Agreement, we do give them the right to to negotiate, to have control during such proceedings. Even the Philippine government goes out of its way to protect our erring OFWs. Remember that even if we have drug mules in China, we sent our vice president there. So it's inherent really in all governments to protect their citizens when they have problems abroad. So we're just making an issue here, but the groups that are making it an issue here, okay, are the very same groups. We're going to make it an issue if the government does not do any action.
Welcome back to News.PH. I'm Pion Tavera. Still with us, DOJ Undersecretary Jose Justiniano, and joining us, Attorney Paul Santos, who is the unlawyer on Twitter, and Attorney Anel Diaz. Are you on Twitter also, Anel?
No,
not yet.
Not yet.
Soon
You've
to be.
you've been telling me to go to Twitter.
Yes, you should.
I will.
Jose Justiniano, are you on Twitter?
No.
No, don't you want to be on Twitter? Anyway, okay. Let's talk about the Pemberton Laude case and the BFA. Was Pemberton's appearance at the preliminary investigation required? Because, you know, the headlines yesterday, Pemberton, no show at PI, etc. Was it correct to crucify him for that?
He doesn't have to show because attendance of an accused during preliminary investigation is optional. If he doesn't want to go, he doesn't have to go.
Yeah, and those are our laws, our own rules.
Yes.
It applies to Filipino citizens.
And foreigners alike. Yes.
And foreigners alike, okay.
Except that, if I may add, if ultimately he decides to file his own counter affidavit, which is again optional on his part, then he would have to appear so that he could personally subscribe it.
Yeah, when you say personally subscribe, meaning swear to this is the truth, etc.
The accuracy, truthfulness of the counter affidavit.
Okay. And not even the visiting forces agreement can force his presence at, well, yesterday's PI or the a follow-up preliminary investigation hearing on the 27th on Monday.
No, he doesn't have to.
No.
I mean, he can't be forced.
Okay. But the Olongapo City Prosecutor required his presence for Monday. Ano po yun, Jose Justiniano?
During the hearing last yesterday,
Yesterday.
the counsel of Pemberton was directed by the city prosecutor to bring her client on Monday. But as they have said, it's really optional on their part.
So why would
they may appear and submit a counter affidavit, subscribe the affidavit before the city prosecutor. They may subscribe the counter affidavit even before another prosecutor. That's what we did in the Subic rape case. We did not bring our clients there. We got a prosecutor from other, I think, if I recall it correctly, a Manila prosecutor. Have it subscribed, the counter have it subscribed before a Manila prosecutor, and under the rules, that's valid. In fact, in the absence of a prosecutor or government lawyers authorized to administer, even a notary public can administer, that's very clear under the rules of court.
That's why it becomes a sword statement kapag
notarized. So, or altogether, he may ignore the subpoena and let the case be submitted for resolution on the basis of the evidence submitted by the complainant.
So why would the Olongapo City Prosecutor order the lawyer to present the client?
It's her call.
No, but I mean, if it's her, how can it be her call if the laws do not require somebody's presence?
Actually, there is also a stage where the city prosecutor or the prosecutor may require the presence if he asks for clarificatory questions.
Okay.
You submit your affidavit, and there is a provision in the rules of court that the investigating prosecutor can ask clarificatory, and you have to be present.
Okay. But can Pemberton opt not to submit a counter affidavit? Pwede rin, ano?
Yes, it's purely optional on his part. And just like what Undersecretary said, if he opts not to file a counter affidavit, then the city prosecutor of Olongapo will decide the case on the basis of the evidence of the complainant.
What does it mean if he won't? Is that going to be bad for his case, good for his case, or when is that moment when you will tell your client, ka na mag-file ng counter affidavit, mahina kaso sa'yo, yun ba?
It's the call of the lawyer, of the respondent. Because if you think that the prosecutor will file the case anyway against your client, why submit a counter affidavit? You will just open their eyes, the eyes of the complainant, as to their weak spot.
Okay.
They can remedy.
Parang ipapako mo na yung kliyente mo doon sa...
No, there are cases really where it is better not to submit a counter affidavit.
Okay.
And just slug it out in court.
Slug it out in court.
Yes.
Okay. Things happened very fast this morning, and I had asked you, Sec Justiniano, about this earlier. No? So yesterday, the DND was informed by the DFA that Pemberton will be transferred to Camp Aguinaldo. But it still isn't Philippine jurisdiction. It still isn't Philippine custody, correct? Paul?
The way I'm looking at it is, I think both the U.S. and the Philippines have tried to work out a compromise with the detention of Pemberton, because under the VFA, it's clear that the United States has custody of Pemberton until the conclusion of all judicial proceedings. I'm fairly certain that they're sensitive to public opinion now, and they've tried to work out a compromise within the framework of the VFA. So that's why you have a situation where Pemberton is detained inside Camp Aguinaldo, and inside Camp Aguinaldo is a JUSMAG post, which is a U.S. facility. So he's supposed to be under joint detention. So it's a compromise.
So it's something that will make both sides happy.
I think so, yes.
But then, there are people, especially leftist groups, who take this as an insult in so many words.
But remember that, again, if Pemberton were, say, a foreigner, a civilian foreigner, accused of something as heinous as murder, then actually at this point in time, he would still be free.
Free, right.
He probably can't leave the country, because I'm pretty certain at this time there would be a lookout order against him at the airport. But he still has his freedom. The only reason why Pemberton is detained this moment because he still is under U.S. military jurisdiction. So I would imagine this is something equivalent to being confined to quarters or something like that. No? So that's why he's detained. But in other circumstances, if he were a civilian, he would still be free.
Okay. Yung jurisdiction and custody, jurisdiction will only apply when the case is filed already, di ba?
When a warrant for arrest has been issued and he pleads in court, he enters a plea in court, then that's the time that the court acquires jurisdiction over him.
Okay. So when a warrant of arrest is issued and he appears before the court on arraignment day, who should have custody of him? Well,
what would happen is that Philippines ordinarily should have custody over the accused. No? But again, because of the VFA, under the peculiar nature of our VFA, the U.S. may retain custody over Pemberton. Again, if you compare our VFA with, say, the status of forces agreement in Japan, with NATO, with Korea, the minute that charges are filed in court against a U.S. military accused, the U.S. has the obligation to transfer custody to the local authorities, which won't happen in this case because of the terms of our VFA.
And there's nothing we can do about it because of the terms of our VFA.
We may invoke the extraordinary, what I call the extraordinary circumstances clause in the VFA. But if the Daniel Smith case is any guide, most likely the U.S. will insist on retaining custody over Pemberton.
Yeah, I had asked you, Sec Justiniano, and I wanted you to answer this also, Anel, no? Plus my last 3 questions to Paul. I was asking you, Sec Justiniano, kanina, I mean, is it possible, okay, when there's an arrest warrant and then he has presented, ang Philippine authorities ba papasok doon sa JUSMAG, U.S. installation in Camp Aguinaldo? Bibit-bitin ba ng Philippine authorities si Pemberton? Halika nga rito, sama ka sa amin. Mangyayari ba yun?
To my mind, I don't think it will happen. I think we have to take into consideration the peculiar nature of this case, that it involves 2 governments. So I think the way this will pan out is that whatever arrangements there will be in the future as regards Pemberton, it will always be coursed through these 2 governments. So there will always be a political angle to it.
Yeah. Okay.
So whether our local authorities would actually enter any facility where Pemberton is presently detained, I think that will not happen in the ordinary course of law without prior clearance from the 2 governments who are involved in this case.
But who should have custody? I mean, okay.
Tia,
What, based on the VFA?
Again, the VFA is very clear in Article 5 that if the United States so requests that they take custody of any U.S. personnel over which the Philippines is to exercise jurisdiction, then the Philippines should give custody to the United States. That is one very restrictive interpretation because of the wordings used in the VFA. So, if and when the United States does make that request to the Philippine government, it would seem, based on that interpretation, that physical custody will then be with the United States.
Okay, sir, we'll just have to take a short break. News.PH will be right back. Welcome back to News.PH. I'm Pio Ontiveros. Still with us, DOJ Undersecretary Jose Justiniano, Attorney Paul Santos, and Attorney Anel Diaz. Let's go to, earlier you were saying, Yusek, no, na ang importante dito, and I will paraphrase, no, what we should focus efforts and attention on is the case, no?
The evidence.
Is it a strong case?
Yes.
Because if we laser focus on sovereignty, VFA, getting Pemberton in a Philippine custody, tapos pabayaan yung kaso.
Of course, that should not happen. In fact, if I recall it correctly, that became a problem in the Daniel Smith case because the other side, or those people supporting, were so much focused on the custody issue. And they, I would say, they did not give much attention to the evidence necessary to convict. Of course, he was convicted. In that case, there was a change of theory. In the information, the rape was allegedly committed through intimidation. But during the trial, they dwelt on the alleged intoxication of Nicole. That she was deprived of reason when the incident happened.
To have given her consent.
So, we capitalized on that issue. We said, you cannot prove something which is not alleged in the information. And that was one of the reasons why the judgment of conviction was reversed, set aside by the Court of Appeals.
Okay. So, ang importante dito, Paul and Nel, is yung kaso.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, does the prosecution so far have a solid case against Pemberton?
Well, again, reading from the news reports, we have pieces of evidence already available. I think the most important piece of evidence now would be the traces of physical evidence that were obtained from the crime scene itself, the condoms, and whatever other items that were picked up at the scene. So, if properly...
To prove what? That the two of them, only Pemberton and Laude were in that room.
Well, at least they were together, no?
That they were together.
And once that happens, and once that's proved in court, the burden will now be on Pemberton to explain his presence in the room and what happened to Miss Laude. If that's proven, well, that would be quite a case for them to hurdle, since there were no actual witnesses inside the room itself. It's the physical evidence that will speak.
So physical evidence, what, DNA?
Yes, DNA.
Pero we're not a country known for our DNA.
Well, we do have facilities already in place. I hope the Olongapo City Police takes advantage of these facilities to obtain the DNA that they need. And I hope, again, relying on the provisions of the VFA, I hope the U.S. Navy authorities themselves offer some cooperation as well, because they are obligated under that agreement to cooperate with Philippine authorities in the prosecution of crimes involving U.S. servicemen.
Anel?
Well, from a purely outsider, hearing news and reading whatever.
There have been so many reports kasi about all this evidence.
My own personal take on it is, I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to file a case. But whether that is enough to actually carry a conviction later on, I think that's still a question.
Okay. When you say enough circumstantial evidence, what has been reported so far, minus the physical evidence, Paul, you were talking about, are the CCTV
the alleged CCTV.
Yeah,
there was
footage. But the CCTV footage is of a man and a woman, a Caucasian man and a Filipino woman in the bar.
Yes.
What is the name of the Ambiance? Ambiance.
Yes.
Not the hotel. How will that impact on the case for against Pemberton?
If it is established that the figures in the CCTV screen grab are in fact Pemberton and Jennifer, then at least we can establish that on the night of the incident they were together. At least a few hours or a few minutes before the incident they were together. So at least that much is already established. So they would just have to build on the circumstantial evidence, because there's no direct evidence that actually points that the two of them were seen inside the lodge. For now, that's the predicament that I see.
Yeah, Paul.
Well, again, it would depend on for example, typically this kind of crime would hinge on, say, witnesses showing them together at least until the time that they entered the lodge itself. It would be great if somebody saw them enter the room, no? But until that evidence appears, the only things that we can latch on to would be the alleged CCTV evidence, as mentioned by Aniel, and hopefully when the evidence from the scene itself is processed, maybe then we can definitely say that both Mr. Pemberton and Ms. Laude were in the same room at the same space at the same time.
Okay. Even if Barbie, the friend of Jennifer Laude, says that the two were together because she brought, in her testimony today at the Senate, and I suppose in her affidavit, she said that she went with them to the hotel, and she said that she went with them up to the room and then left them there. If
she does testify to that fact in court, well, at least that places those, both Pemberton and Laude in the same place at the same time. That would be helpful if that evidence is presented in court and if it isn't impeached.
Okay, impeached meaning if no one will.
If her evidence isn't contradicted or contradicted. Yeah.
Okay. So far what we have, the evidence, the CCTV video, if like you said, no, if it shows Pemberton and Laude together in the bar,
yes,
which is different from
the
whatever's in the
hotel.
hotel, it does not establish that Pemberton killed Laude.
Definitely not, the way I look at it. That's entirely different already. What would, to my mind, what it will only establish is that they were together in the bar. Now, for us to stretch and actually deduce that already is tantamount to Pemberton being the culprit to the crime, that is quite a leap in terms of reasoning. There has to be something more direct than that.
Okay, has to be something more direct than that. It's a leap in reasoning. Meaning, kayo mga abogado, judges, prosecutors, you don't think this way na, oh, there was a video of Pemberton and Laude, they were in the bar. And then her friend says they went to a hotel. And then later Pemberton leaves the hotel and then Laude is found dead. Oh, Pemberton killed Laude. We can't make that conclusion.
Not yet. Again, a reasonable connection must be made. Between the fact that the Pemberton and Laude went to the same room together, Pemberton left by himself, then the prosecution still has to establish by the evidence that's available what Pemberton did to Laude, if at all. So that connection still has to be made, because one thing that the prosecution needs to overcome is the presumption of innocence, and the standard that's set by law is Pemberton's guilt must be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So
hindi pwede yung I suspect you killed Pemberton. I suspect you killed Laude. Prove to us that you did not kill Laude. Hindi pwedeng ganon.
However, but in this case, since again, based on the physical, if the physical evidence proves that they were in the same room at the same time, then I think it would be Pemberton's duty now to prove to the court what he was doing in that place at that time.
Okay. Yusek Justiniano, the Olongapo prosecutors are, we suppose, looking for that physical evidence. Does that have to form part of the body of evidence that they will look upon?
At this point in time, it is not our job to look for evidence. We are conducting preliminary investigation.
Okay.
We have to be impartial.
Yeah.
It is the task of the
police
Olongapo City Police,
Yeah.
the complainant, their lawyer. Their lawyer should play a very important role in getting the evidence needed to establish probable cause.
Okay, we'll have to take a short break. Please stay with us. News.PH will be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching News.PH. Still with us, DOJ Undersecretary Jose Justiniano, Attorney Paul Santos, and Attorney Anel Diaz. Okay. Yusek Justiniano and Attorney Diaz, Attorney Santos, does it help the Laude family's case, yung pagpunta, the visit at Campo Aguinaldo today, Harry Roque bringing them there, and the sister of Jennifer Laude and her fiancé, the German fiancé, climbing the fence and attempting to get into the area?
There is no need for them to do that. Because that will not form part of the evidence, even during the preliminary investigation. There's no need.
Yeah, but
it won't help their case.
It won't help their case. But what about, will it help their case in the eyes of the public? You know,
that's a different matter. But the one who will judge is not the public, but a court of law.
Yeah. Paul?
Well, it makes for great optics, as Yusek Justiniano said. No? But I think at this point in time, private prosecutor here, well, in this case would be Attorney Roque, should be focusing on obtaining whatever evidence they may have to bolster their case.
Are you saying, Paul, that you would not, if you were the private prosecutor in this case, you would not have advised them to do that?
Well, depending on the situation, probably some publicity is in order, but I think the focus should be really on obtaining the evidence required to obtain, well, in this case, at least an indictment and a later conviction for the accused.
Okay, Anel.
Well, I totally agree with them. I don't see how that helps build a solid case against the accused. But if they're after public sympathy, media mileage, for whatever reason, then perhaps they achieved that today.
Yung private prosecutors are under the control of the DOJ
that
also?
That is very clear. Under the revised rules on criminal prosecution, which says all criminal prosecution shall be under the direction and control of the public prosecutor. It means we decide what evidence to present, who to call as witnesses. The role of a private prosecutor is merely to enforce the civil aspect of the case, the damages.
Okay.
But insofar as the criminal aspect, it is us who decide,
okay.
not the private prosecutor.
But something like that earlier, the visit to Campo Aguinaldo, would you have told Harry Roque, no, don't do that? Or,
well,
or is that,
we are
but
not
that
yet,
is something you cannot control?
We cannot control that because there is no trial yet. No information has been filed with the court. But the moment an information is filed with the court and there is trial, we take the lead, not the private prosecutor. That's very clear.
So anything and everything that goes on inside and outside the courtroom,
we decide.
So hindi na pwede yung ganon?
Hindi na pwede. In fact, before a private prosecutor can speak, he must be specifically authorized by the public prosecutor to conduct the trial under our direction and control. And if he does not have that authority from the public prosecutor, he will not be recognized by the judge. He cannot sign pleading. The private prosecutor, he cannot sign pleadings without the public prosecutor co-signing the pleadings with him.
Okay. Last 3 minutes of the show, I wanted to ask you all for your final words. The question would be, where do you think this is going? Attorney Anel Diaz.
Well, for the family, I wish that they get justice in whatever form that is. in the sense that if indeed it is proven that Mr. Pemberton was the perpetrator of this crime, then I pray that they get a conviction for them, for their own peace. And if it is proven that, if it is shown that Mr. Pemberton was falsely accused, then he deserves an acquittal.
Okay. Attorney Paul Santos?
Well, I think even from the get-go, I think the sympathy of the public is with Ms. Laude and her family, and I think that will continue so trial, so they don't have to, I mean, the family doesn't have to worry about obtaining the public sympathy. I think the prosecution now, their immediate objective is to build a strong case against the accused. And I really do hope that Ms. Laude and her family get the justice they deserve.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd rather not comment on that because, as I have said, this is still undergoing preliminary investigation, and it will be premature for us to make a conclusion that we will be filing a case against Pemberton at this point.
Okay. But do you agree earlier, like what Anel and Paul were saying, no? Strong enough for an indictment, but not quite sure?
There is a difference between proof beyond reasonable doubt and probable cause.
Okay.
It's really difficult to establish the guilt of the accused beyond reasonable doubt, because the moment there is doubt on the mind of the judge, then he must acquit the accused.
Okay. And that is your final word?
That is our difficult job.
All right. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much for joining us. DOJ Justice Undersecretary Justiniano, thank you, sir. Attorney Paul Santos, thank you, Paul. And Attorney Anel Diaz, thank you very much.
Maraming salamat.
And thank you for watching News.PH. I'm Pion Tavera. See you again next Wednesday. Good night.
Including my client.
On the grounds of?
There was no evidence against them, the three.
Yeah, when you say no evidence against them,
No
meaning they did
evidence
not
that they participated in the alleged rape.
even if they were in the van at the time.
Because mere presence will not make you liable. So Smith was convicted, and in his appeal, he retained my services. I represented only Daniel Smith during the appeal, which he interposed.
Okay. Before we go on to the case of Jennifer Laude, how does the U.S. government, is it the U.S. Embassy that gets your services, the services of private lawyers who will handle the cases for these
no, it's like
American
this.
soldiers?
The U.S. Embassy has a list of accredited lawyers, law firms.
Okay.
And in cases like this, the list is shown to the potential
Filipino transgender woman, Jennifer Laude. Joining us tonight in this first part of the show, DOJ Undersecretary or Justice Undersecretary Jose Justiniano, who was counsel for one of 4 American soldiers, correct?
Actually,
apart from Daniel Smith.
No. Let me correct that.
Oh, okay.
There were 6 suspects when the case was investigated. I represented initially 2 of them, Corporal Cory Buris and Albert Lara.
Okay.
I was able to get a dismissal for the 2 of them during the preliminary investigation, as I was able to prove that they were not inside the van where the incident allegedly happened. So 4 were left.
Okay.
Silkwood, Smith,
Duplantis.
Carpentier, and Duplantis for trial. And my services were retained by Silkwood.
Okay.
And then, as we all know, 3 were acquitted. In the case, even my own law firm initially was hesitant to accept engagement
Okay.
And no, no partners there would like to handle that case.
Okay. So who else? You mentioned three other names of law firms that were on that list.
Yes, as I have said, King Rodrigo,
Yes. Apart from them.
John Colosso, I cannot recall now the
Okay.
name.
How many law firms are on that list? And is this something that is
Four. Four law
four
firms,
lang.
yes.
Okay. Is this so? It's like a running list. It's shown to every American who will need a lawyer in the
Yes.
Philippines. Ganon.
Yes, yes. There are
Okay.
many cases like that one. In fact, I represented also a retired U.S. serviceman, and he got my initial client. And they choose the counsel which they want from the list.
So at that time, you were with what
I
law
was
firm?
with Sisip Salatar Hernandez and Gatmaitan Law Offices. I was then a partner in that law firm. That was in 2005.
Yes. How many other law firms are on that list?
Of course, the law firm of King Rodrigo, the husband of Boots Anson Roa.
Okay.
And then John Colosso, who represented Duplantis. And then Attorney Benjamin Formoso, who represented Daniel Smith.
And the other big law firms, ACRA, for example, the firm,
There were no
etc.
big law because, you know, that was a very controversial case. And I even in my own law firm,
No, I mean, there were no other big law firms in the list.
there were.
There were, yeah.
But
So,
since it was a controversial,
good evening. This is News.PH, but it's not politics as usual. I'm Pia Ontiveros. In a sudden turn of events, U.S. Marine Private First Class Joseph Scott Pemberton was transferred from the USS Peleliu to Camp Aguinaldo. Pemberton is the suspect in the killing of